Alright, 당도 차상 한 제해야 로디기 롭잔리아 차상 좀제 항상 차상 도스지네 아직 시야다니 된 거업 좀 어디네 차상 제시들레스 가봐도
Well, just want to start by saying good Happy New Year to everyone. And it's the first time we're gathering together for our first weekend teaching, our first study group for the year. And it's really nice to see you all again.
나 우메 데믹스에 대당한 주기 다 동아세 다 띵기 대화 토비아 당아 주 동아 자와기니 매바 쇠기 탑람 다 냠렌지에디 내가 직도 진도 디화로 냠렌제발라 안 탄이수 말홍와 안 다다다 체다 탄이수 밀후 우메기 람더네 냠렌제 조고를 해야지 인상은 주 우메기 내 우메기 람 냠렌제기 다 도시는 우메팀 디화를 향해서 나 롱하면 도시네 아직 제시한 마 도시대 되는 삼된 마셔야래.
The text that we're looking at is called The Key to the Middle Way. And it is an unmistaken and complete technique to achieve a state of lasting happiness, a happiness that isn't punctuated by even a moment of unpleasantness. It presents the technique to attain a state of freedom, of liberation, freedom from suffering, liberated from suffering. And the technique technique to train one's mind that is presented in here is a technique of the middle way. And it's called the middle way because it's free from extremes. So abiding perfectly between two extremes is the path of the middle way.
chi tunjin thone an dungwa se da an digi tuya ji chagin ji yong go de ina zo nga zo ting ye duwa dungwa se da ting ye digi tuya di an nga zo sambi thone samlo gywa dang bi thone an samlo thone chu go ho re wa.
Something that is self-evidently true, that all beings want to experience happiness and to be freed from pain and suffering, certainly severe pain and suffering, but also even the slightest trace of suffering. And the techniques that are employed to achieve happiness are those from the material outer world, and then that of the inner world, the world of consciousness, of the mind. And of these two, it's through transforming our mind that we achieve lasting happiness.
자다 니니기 셈유토니 임바디 먼저 세부를 착으로와 가르세네 나중에 치 튕긴 되사다 안 튕긴 배 야고 수고 되고다 니니기 튕긴 야고 여배 있네야 아니 셈리아 강아 여배 있네 아니 즉 셈리 디기메나 아니 강아 여여바제 강아 여래 제가 튕긴 야고 여배 있네 아니 셈리아 강아 여배네 강아 대 여여바 착으로와 다양 지금 셈리아 즉 대기 여바 셈밀 대하나 제가 수수 셈밀 대기 흘려다 대기 여바 있나 치 튕게 야고 셔라메 되게 안지게 매바 있나야 안 셈밀 대기 여반자 고 대기도 여대와 차고로와.
Perhaps from our own experience and certainly from what we observe, we can see that there's no specific level of material comfort that once attained, one's life is problem-free. We know this from our own experience and what we observe, that no matter one's level of material comfort, one still encounters suffering, pain, and misery. On the other hand, though, when one's mind is in a place of happiness, of calm and peace and at ease, no matter what outer events one encounters, one's mind stays at ease, comfortable and peaceful.
나 되네기 저기 류리야 강아 여바다 되네기 저게 두로다 거기 코 benenga 저기 잘라다 때 둘로 아니 견쇼하다 라서바다 수부 견쇼와 라서바 주바에네 치 튕긴 돈에 안데서 안데 강하게 세 두고로와 안미신 샹다기 아니 저기 베제제가 좀 강하세도 배정한 저기 둘로 없이 쉐바이나 샹다기 첨보잡제 아니 첨보잡제 디시고로 아 수부나리아 지금 나설려네 멤버 저기 파 샤쇼제 파 디신 파 장모쇠네 나서 자투야 안데는 용고로 봐다.
Similarly, when we experience physical suffering, this can be resolved through making use of material comforts. For example, if we're a little cold, we won't wear warmer clothing, or if we're ill, we take some medicine. And moreover, we can rely on others who are skilled in specific areas. For example, through a tailor, we can get appropriate clothes. Through a doctor, we can get the appropriate medicine. So this too, we have experience of. And this, and what I mentioned in the previous segment, we can easily understand, but we need to see it or understand it for ourselves clearly so that we can recognize the role of the relationship between mental happiness and physical happiness. So, for example, even if we have a severe illness, our kidneys aren't functioning, we can even have an operation, and from another person, we can receive a kidney. However, on the side of the mental side, not the physical, but now the mental side, here our own mental state, whether we are kind-hearted, our mind is spacious and gentle, this is up to us. This is something we ourselves need to take care of.
Sem sogyot nayagi sem ngambirit pa dur sangbui di nyamlen chelia da di tablam di dine che gore sa di da sang yu jemnen di ma tablam di nga lamden che sha ro da da tablam di nga jugi lamga di beju tang bai na nga jugi ya sem sangan di pa ngamba di pa dur sangbo chup tu go bare da nga jugi di lalam nga jugi so so rana nga ma che bai na ani di yo jikju sangamba dur che sangbo chup tu go marwa.
To bring about a transformation of our mind, in particular one that is lasting and stable, to develop a new outlook that is based on tenderness and kindness as well as wisdom. This is something that we ourselves have to do, but we're not alone in this. Here, the skilled way is to rely on a guide, someone who, based on their own knowledge and experience, brought about independence on that knowledge, can lead us in the various practices in order to bring about mental development. In particular, if the mental development that one aspires to here, where one develops one's mind to a state that no matter what one encounters, one's mind stays peaceful and calm and gentle.
Sangbo ngamba da sangbo yewa chine sem yago di pa yago yar da ya da sem ngamba duga di pa meba soyale di han sem khorong ge jen ma da shanda ma ju ge so so lagba da di ne ge zubu ge je me da sem khorong so so sem khorong ge gyuwa da je sem ngam ringem bi ri de sem khorong ge gyuwa da je sem rang ge rang yi yago soya de ma do so so rang rang ge so so rang ge sem di so so rang ge sem di yago soya le ma do 미션다게 셈디 소소기 나서 셈기 파 야고서 되야메레 생기 셈기 나서 셈디 야고서 되야메레 지상 나서기 소소라는 셈디기 소소라는 셈디 근데 약보서 거야 돼. 셈 코로나를 알아야 돼요.
Moreover, to strengthen our habituation to virtuous, wholesome ways of thinking, and weaken our habituation to unwholesome, harmful ways of thinking, this can only be done through transforming our mind. This can't be done through some kind of physical activity or other kind of material machine. It can only be done through transforming our mind. And moreover, and where we can recognize this too, is as much as we may want to, we cannot change the mind of someone else. That is up to them themselves. Likewise, changing our own mind is our own responsibility.
어디네기 도시네 삼다 제바지용도 갑라 아주기 지게 콜유나야 강하다 묘자몽부 지미 저지게 강하몽보다 마추다 되네기 토네다 콜유 토네 강하리에디게 다 조도 스가르슬리도 시심지도 조 셈리아 투보레 셈된디고레 다 셈르데나리에디 가르슬리도 시비야 심주치 셈파 심주치도 갑라 되샤 공조 나야 마릭 데솔테네 안 되샤 공조가게 데솔테네 리고레 리고레 세상 되샤 여바자 나를 디고고도 나디 왕고도 신데는 디디던달라 마자야다 주부자레 안에 공조세도 나를 그 누구도 신데네 디지는 어느 지금 지게 주부자다 되네 토네 세상 두진 되샤 공조 나게 데솔테 녀모 받을래 되샤 공조 나게 디기게 두신에 딱 간스 리고레스디 다도신 베나가 주게다 류 동아기 풍부하셔야 되나 동아기 유에 동아 차바도 주 동아셔야 동아디게 차바도 주 풍부지냐 간스 리고레스네 소 셈레텐 레다 녀모 발레텐 리고레 셈레텐 리고 세상다 레다 녀모 바다 되샤 녀모 바다 콩로라서 바데네 칼리고스 자와디 고마시비 무취 나주게 셈기 니수 뭐네 마시비 디묵 딘신셔야 되라 딘신들 리고레 에지로다
Every illustration of suffering that we have experienced or that we've observed in the world, whether it's from a slight discomfort or to something extreme like warfare, this all comes from the mind. The foundational cause is consciousness, is a way of thinking. In particular, comes from ignorance. The ignorance grasp that the self and as existing in a particular way, and from this comes the thought of I want. And then with this thought of I want is another consciousness, one of attachment, where we want certain things, perhaps things to go our own way, for example. And through that, one engages in activities that bring harm. And when things don't go the way we want, another thought arises, I don't want this, and we repel, push something away. And this then is expressed through anger. So these three minds, ignorance and its resulting attachment and its resulting anger, it's from this that suffering is both experienced by oneself and brought into the lives of others. And whatever form of suffering one observes or considers, whether it's a suffering of physical and mental pain, or the suffering of transient happiness, or all-pervasive suffering, it all comes from, and of those three types, whether it's experienced mentally or physically, it all comes from the same root, that of ignorance.
다 딘지 마릭 봐서 다 간식을 라고래 세도 간식이 라면 당 두스네 셈 코로리아 지나당 두스네 심주치도 갑라 다 딘지 마릭 봐라도 유이디 순나요도 갑라 강라에 마도 봐 지글로에 파샤바 셴라마도 코롱 문이 랑 문이 줍도 가지 나도 거래스 디나와 나지 나가라리 좀 징긴들다 딘지 마릭 봐서 차거와
There are many types of ignorance, but the ignorance that is the root cause of all suffering The ignorance that creates samsara is the ignorance of true grasping. So what is meant by the ignorance of true grasping? So ignorance, first of all, is a consciousness, and it grasps at phenomena or objects as existing in the way they appear. So everything we think about, whether it's something that we perceive through our senses or it's something we're just thinking about through mental consciousness, it appears to our consciousness in a particular way, and then another consciousness grasps at it as existing in the way that it appears. And that is the ignorance of true grasping.
Di meba soba ina dunga se tingi meba zawani meba sodu gore. Chisa dunga tingi meba na so saba ina dine gidine tingi dewa de tobo gorwa. Dine yenza nga jugi tenzi marik bade meba so gore. Chisa tenzi marik bade pangba la ya ani ko korongi dine gi tenzi de dangbo ngoche ba che nga za hago ba che tenzi kandeshi yo lo de ngoche ba che. Ngoche ne ani korongi yu di zimba na shi korona rangu ni tuba na wa na shi wo zingore Zimba nashi ndu mendu jeba che shimju che jeba che ne andi gansam che liya du shimju che tamal ya koi na wa na zimba na zawo gi ne mindu sibe rangu ne duba sa de kola na wa na shin che zawo gi ne mindu wa sampe gi ngeba chi nyeyo du tini de lo de la tongba yi to lo ho se or che san de lo ume lam se or che da ume lam di ma zo di gomba le de ne ta si tenzi marik pa de pangu gore se or ma
This ignorance of true grasping, this is the very root cause of all our afflicted minds, attachment, anger, and all others, as well as being the root cause of all forms of suffering. Everything that's unwanted, that is experienced, comes from this ignorance. When we recognize that, then it becomes clear. That ignorance needs to be eradicated. If from it all suffering comes, if I eradicate it, suffering will be eradicated completely. And this is the case. This attainment of a state of lasting happiness, a happiness that is stable, that is never punctuated, it doesn't fluctuate, one's happiness is stable, that is achieved through the eradication of this ignorance. So to be able to eradicate this ignorance, one first needs to identify it clearly. We need to identify what it is that a consciousness is grasping at as existing in the way that it appears. So one first needs to recognize how whatever it is we're thinking about, the object of thought, how it appears, and then we can recognize, we investigate to see if the way it appears is the way it exists or not. So that's the second step, the process of investigation. The first was to recognize how the object of thought appears. The second is to investigate. We'll come to the conclusion that nothing exists in the way that it appears. It is empty of existing in the way that it appears. And the consciousness that realizes this is a wisdom, contrary to the ignorance that grasped at things as existing in the way they appear. This is now wisdom realizing emptiness, the wisdom that realizes that phenomena do not exist in the way they appear. And how to generate this wisdom is to go through this process of training, developing this mental path, and this path is the path of the middle way, free from both extremes. This text that we've been looking at for a year already has been looking at precisely this. How do phenomena appear? Do they exist in that way or not? and how to do that investigation to find out. And also the understanding that it is that ignorance that grasps at phenomena as existing the way they appear, that is the root of our suffering. The root of all our afflictions is that. And then we looked at many times then how to engage in the process of analysis in order to come to understand reality.
Number shebani Gumatabu said that don't keep it, Donalva, and the Shersing Donalba to Sunyorwadi, Masungorwa, Sowada, Dusheta, Dujenam, Dujenamda, number shebani Gumatabu was.
Now we'll continue in the same place as we concluded last year. So we are at the top of page 18. There's a quotation from the 25,000 stanza Perfection of Wisdom Sutra. And we had come to the fourth line from the top, the very last word, feelings. Feelings, discriminations, compositional factors, and consciousnesses are like illusions. So again, page 18, starting at the last word of the fourth line from the top.
Standa chowadan dushedan dujenamdan number shebani Gumatabu was it. That Shersing Sanji Jimnendiki, Cherching Donna Martin Sonadu, and I also do some Dabena Lamza, the Dondadi, Jumata Vore says, Jumadu Sama Dondadi, Sevoraching and the Hago to go Marwa. That the Gablian, Dokoronga Cheduche, Dujetikilia, Tinesonodu, Digi, and Tompani Tingo Badi, Hago to go.
For ourselves, when we read this, feelings, discriminations, compositional factors, and consciousnesses are like illusions. If you've been hearing teachings for a while, we'll understand what is meant here. But that feelings and so forth necessarily are illusions, that perhaps doesn't come so readily to mind. And certainly the way we sincerely relate to feelings, discriminations, and so forth as being illusion-like, this is not probably how we readily relate to them.
Na Jumatabu was the Jumadia Pellicharge, and Jumadima Pellipache, and it's Hawadi, Dinashin, Jumanashin, Sungorwa, the Jumad Pellicha. Jumazia did that, and the Jumazia de Kanichi till Yore Laviadu, Penda Juma said Juma Kanji and the Juma Patuenge, Pene Chike Caso Sem Genro. Daruji, Diana, Najaruji, Dumbaina. That Azulina delia Semjen, Daruji, Nangor, in a Nawana Shinchik, Daddy, God who is Cheba, Daddy Yomarwan. Daddy, when he got Nawana Shinchi, Daddy, when he rang, when he let Daddy Yomarwa.
When the Buddha taught the sutra, before him would have been people who had a deep understanding and almost certainly would have had a realization of emptiness. Just hearing these words would have had a profound impact on them. But for us, we need to relate to them more in accordance of our own level. So the reason why an illustration of an illusion is being used is because we can understand that when an illusion is conjured, perhaps of an animal such as a horse or a bird, we know that if we investigate this appearance of, say, a horse, we will not find an actual horse because it is just an illusion.
Jumajing Anzulia, Nangore, Nawana Shinji Mevare, in a Nangore, Jumaji Yoro, Juma Yorova, that Juma Mevare and Mevan Mare, Juma de Yores, Casamanzu Umashilji Nangore. The Nawana Shinji don't Yores, Chebana, then I near Mevar, Chagoreva. Tis not any that the Jumadi Ganis Yunguri Labdu, Korongi, Zedang, Anjiki Jalach Yorova, Desula Dene, Tunjentiki Zomje, Denigi Zom, Nanzuki. Won't be Shebalet, Jitan, Jinai, the Nigi, Jinai, Nangur, the Nan the Gablan, Penny, and what Darubish do, Sachpa to Lupa Penny to do, say, Dagorwa. It's not the Nigi Tawana, Shinjipa, Jeba Jevana, Daddy Yomarwa. You must say it in the Shagorwa.
we ask ourselves, let's say the magician has conjured a horse. We ask ourselves, does this illusion exist? And yes, it exists. The illusion exists. But does it exist in the way that it appears as a horse? No, because if we investigate the horse, we will not find a horse. And the reason is because the magician would have done whatever magic tricks the magician does. A horse would have appeared to our sense consciousness, it would have appeared to our eye sense consciousness. But if we then investigate to see if the horse exists in the way that it appears, we will not find it.
Nangorwa, that's Nangorwa, the Jumarwa, 9 euro. Chesadi now and I said you do it in a town on your marwa. There was none on Marwa. And the name that is an answer, so what ye did over it, Dusheti did over it, Duji, the number Shabbat did over it, said. That is an did over it, says Sungorwa.
Similarly, to how we saw in the previous line, where we concluded last year, forms are like illusions. So too, as now we're continuing, are feelings, discriminations, compositional factors, and consciousnesses.
지나도 초와디 바 생각 sem난도 전에 심주 전에가 초와디 바로를 바샤 다 초와디 샤요도 갑랑 안서 로야 초와디 샤도 로래 나요도 초와디 가르스 난거도 다디 양도 10초 3당고 샤고래 또 3당에도 갑라 초와디 중앙서 초와지 나요도 아주 하고도 초와디 되는 용도 선배 초와도 선배 초와디 나요도 로들 나요도 갑라 초와 고랑 강라에 맞여 봐 그런 원이 줍되버지 나와 지는 거다 난 거래. 지선 디나와 나신치 누게 민도 제바네. 되는요 말에. 제바네 요 지도 유만하지. 나 따나신 는 거데. 따나와 나지 따도 민도 제바지나 따녀요 말아. 디나신 소와디 강라에 마되버 랑 원이 줍어지 는 거 그런 원이 줍되버 는 거데. 나와 나신치 소와디 대 간이 두스 제바네. 강라에 마되버 랑 원이 줍되버지 녀요 말이지.
Taking then as an object of feeling. So feeling, a feeling will appear to consciousness. So sorry, just I'll restart. So feelings we see here are like illusion. So what does it mean to say that a feeling is like an illusion? We take feeling then as an object. So often previously we would have taken a form. Now here we'll take a feeling. So feeling appears to consciousness. So then we need to first come to recognize or identify clearly how the feeling appears to our consciousness. So feeling itself is a consciousness, and it appears, arises in our mind. And now we take another consciousness to investigate how does feeling appear? Then when we come to recognize how this consciousness of feeling appears to us, which is that it appears to be truly existent or self-existent or existing by way of its own essence. When we come to recognize that it seems, that feeling seems to exist from its own side, we then can investigate and look to see if the feeling exists in the way that it appears. Does it exist from its own side or not? And we won't be able to find such a feeling. And we will recognize that it is actually illusory, just like the horse.
제가 두신 초와디 나와나 신지 나와든 두에 민도 제바치게 나와나시 자고 있는 매바지 동상이 통용도 갑라 초와디 머주베 동베 동바세 통용을 디동요 디도요 동방이 초와디 머주베 동베 동방이 도요디 대시 초와 강来말한 건데 주바 예스미 진바디 로노트이 바 록시 바 통통고 그리고 라신기 되네 초와디 머주베 동베 도요디 그 라신이 고마 가루고 거다
We're looking at the feeling, whether it's feeling of happiness or suffering or neutral feeling, and we investigate. First we recognize how it appears to consciousness that this feeling of, say, happiness or suffering, it appears to exist from its own side. Then when we investigate to see if it exists in this way or not, we cannot find any self-existent feeling. And we recognize it is empty of existing in the way that it appears. It's empty of true existence. And this consciousness that recognizes this is a wisdom because it's in accordance with reality. And it's the wisdom realizing emptiness. And what does this wisdom realizing emptiness of? It's realizing that the feeling is empty of true existence. Then one has certainty that all our other consciousnesses that grasp at phenomena as existing in the way they appear, such as this feeling, the consciousness that grasps at the feeling as existing from its own side, is not in accordance with reality, because we've looked and we couldn't find such a feeling. So that consciousness that grasps at the feeling as existing in a way that it does not, is not in accordance with reality and is an ignorance, a wrong consciousness. And we can say this now with certainty, not just based on theory, but because we've realized how the feeling exists as empty of true existence. And we've realized that with a consciousness which is a wisdom.
That's how I said the Yumadabore said the Sowadi Ranshin, Demamajubare said how well Namo Soa Horan Kanechi Muson, the nation Nantadi Muson, Samta, and the Chelan to Cheva Chakarova. The name that I know the Soa Dewa Soa said, Penny Nanzuki, Jake Kalas, Chimbura, there are Kalas and that not so pay Shimbu Junso Sebe. So Dewu should Kala Shimbu Junso, so what Dewa Junso Sigura, so what Junsos, so bear with Junso said, you're what the Diringa Soya Budu, say Kala was and the Kaladi, then Soya Budu said Chigurua. She said, didn't Soya Budu something else, do Slamza, so what bed Yahu Junso Sebe, Lavio Ducabla, Mazuki, Gansan Soadi, Kala Matuba, Koronu Juba, Dugurua. Those now the Yabudu said, Soadi, you're not back Chikala, she wasn't so I was you Junsa like the Soa the Ganesh do, said the Pashimji Chevena. Kala and Matu by Tadu Shine, Azuki, Ze Kaladi Kugore. The name Kaladi Yoba some years, so Dewa Mare, the G Umbole, G Umbole Tehore. Then G Umbot and Ze Kala Idi two by Dini Tebala, Dene. 소화지기 기용을 제가 디니 마테바나 칼라디 뇨위게 소화디 기고 말봐 제가 디니게 제가 디 소화디 기엘라 칼라데다 칼라게 옹보니디 제 옹보니네 체비게 디니 체발에 듀두아 듀바인자 디 체발에 듀네 뇨한 직용고래 델파 뢰바 소화세 디링아 소화야 보도 뢰바 소화스 파 달고래스 제가 셴유 다 옹보니 체발에 되네 직태발에 되네 직태발 될라 되네 진용하게 용하대로 뢰파 한 소화세 딩아 소화 대부도세 신부 소화야부도세 파 달고래스 제가 되네자 소화세디 강라에 마디어바 그런 원에 당보인데 디 소화 대부스 주셔야 가야 민두아스 매반자 가르레스네 당보 유인이 태발에 될라 되네 용하게 된 발뢰파 소화세 대부도세 파 다고 제가 与显起来对呢，怕略怕大把来的呢， yueba mato di lupa mata ba de shen yu shen la ma de ba so yu ai mi do so.
As the text says here, feelings are like illusions. For this to have real meaning, profound meaning for us, one first needs to recognize how a feeling appears to consciousness, how it arises in us, or when it has arisen, how it appears to consciousness. That is the crucial first step. Then, to the degree that we recognize that, when we engage in the second step of investigation, and then come to realize that it doesn't exist in the way that it appears, we will have a profound understanding that phenomena do not exist in the way that they appear. Because the way a feeling appears to us is as if it is independent. It appears as real and self-existent. So let's say, for example, one eats a delicious meal. One then experiences a feeling of happiness. So that feeling, when you eat your next meal, see that feeling arise within oneself and try to come to recognize that whilst intellectually we understand that it's dependent, it actually appears to us as being independent, not caused, not related to anything at all, but self-existent. And this is how it and all phenomena appear to us. But when we investigate, we can readily recognize that this feeling of happiness has come about independence on a vast number of causes. In brief, this particular food that has been prepared in a particular way was then smelled, tasted, and in dependence on that, an experience arose. And that experience is a feeling upon which another consciousness imputed happy feeling onto. So here then, in our process of investigation, we come to recognize this sequence of events that led to us experiencing something, and thereby having a feeling, and then that feeling has happiness imputed onto it or labeled onto it. So we need to, we can quite readily understand the sequence of dependency of these various causes that are required. But for it to have a profound impact on us, we need that first step to recognize how a feeling appears to us, or in what way a feeling appears to us as being independent when it is so clearly dependent.
지상 두 따반 디니게 따발에 되는 중요도 소화세디 간라에 마되바 아니 대시 나도 가지고 나도 소화도 가르는 것은 간라에 마도 그런 원이 줍되 봐지 셴데 마되바 그런 원이 줍되 받는 거로 지상 두 심주 제연도 갈라 아니 유다 왕보니 채바 될래 되는 요를 봐 따바 되네래 되네 줍되 진짜 간라에 마되바 랑원이 줍되 wen디 민두 세대 동바 차요 초와데다 간라마 랑문의 주비 동바 세죠 디 간라 랑문의 주비 동바데라 동바니 소 동바니 초와 동바니 세로 초위 된게 동바니 세 동바니 세로 가다.
The sequence then is a wide number of causes coming together leads to an experience of, in this case, the food, and then labeling feeling of happiness onto that experience. So this is the sequence, but that crucial first step that we need to recognize, that when this feeling of happiness arises within our mind, how does it appear to us? And this is that crucial first step, to recognize that it appears to be self-existent, existing from its own side by way of its own nature or its own inherent nature or own essence or characteristics. Whereas in fact, we can quickly recognize, thereafter we can quickly recognize that it arose in dependence on causes, and not only in dependence on causes, but required imputation or labeling by mind. So therefore, the object, in this case a feeling, a pleasant feeling, is empty of existing in the way that it appears. It's empty of existing by way of its own nature. And this is then when one comes to understand emptiness of feeling.
아니 디기 줄로 초와도 매발해 해야지 그거 말다. 초와 동반이 레라도 초와디 되는 여바지 그거 말다. 다 동반이 있어야 되나 주변에 어디 동반이 이래서 균이 매발로시 그거 고야게 냥아요라 님 그거 말다. 초와 동반이 레라도 초와디 여바지를 리고 말다. 가르데 여발리 것은 초와 동반이 레라도 초와디 강라야 맞여봐 랑은 주바데 말해라고 그러와. 강라에 맞대봐 랑응은 주바도 말해 라면도 현실을 뛰는 요래 살 고고 다 같이 디고도 거래. 세상 초와데 강라에 랑응은 주바 동바래 강라에 랑응은 주바도 말해 라면도 초와디 단 현실을 뛰는 용거래 주고래 살지. 세상 된지게 참 살지. 동바니 된진 제외 삼단의 동바니 또 동반이 또어디 아니 동반이 가서 디 땡진 제와 땡주 참어 또야 디리고 레지레 제상 동반이 레라도 강라이마도 랑원이 주베디 동바레 라도 랑 아니 현실을 뛰는 주바레 세 고투고 레지레 제상 현실을 뛰는 주바레 세도 소화되 되지간저 삼단타나심 강라 뛰는 랑원이 주바 또 민두라이도 다 소화되 유가라 아니 유다 긴 초발에 뛰는 주용구도 세야지 고투고 알아봐다.
Once one has recognized emptiness, it's important then, when one has understood that, in this case, feeling is empty, that is a correct understanding, it's a wisdom, but it doesn't mean just because a feeling is empty that it is non-existent. It's very easy to have a misunderstanding, thinking that if something is empty, it therefore does not exist. We need to be very clear that emptiness does not equate to non-existence. When we recognize that the object, in this case a feeling, is empty, we should understand what it is empty of. It's empty of existing in the way that it appears. When we have that phrase clear, we will recognize that it doesn't mean that it's non-existent. It is empty of existing in the way that it appears. Implies, but it still exists, but in a way that is contrary, in a way that is different from how it generally, naturally or innately appears to consciousness. So, the feeling is empty of existing from its own side, independent, not requiring anything else at all. How it actually exists is dependent. Dependence on causes, dependence on parts, moments of consciousness, dependence on imputation by mind. Therefore, the object, in this case a feeling, exists. It does exist, just not in the way that it appears. It is empty of existing in the way that it appears.
다 초화세디 규마다보리 세디 나 돈달디시 거와디 지상 초화세디 안디시 규나께 가서 시행 강라에 마되어봐 랑원 주바 능고르데 나와나 신지 심주 제반나 강라에 마되어봐 랑원 주바도 요 말이스 지상 초화 동반이래 동반 남중에서 동반이 세디 직디 동반이 라용도가다 돈다 직디 고용되네 돈달 가르고 그래서네 시행 강라에 마되어봐 랑원 주바도 요 말에 세디 고고거다 동반이 세디 지상 강라에 마되어봐 랑원 주바도 요 말에 라용도 현실을 뛰는 거래 세지고 되네기 돈달도 슬리고
That then is the meaning of feeling is like an illusion. And to come to recognize this for ourselves, the first step then is to recognize how the object, in this case the consciousness of feeling, appears to mind. Then we investigate to see if the way it appears is in accordance with how it exists or not. And then we come to recognize that the way it appears is not how it exists at all. It is empty of existing in the way that it appears. Thereafter, we remind ourselves that the meaning of this word emptiness. Emptiness does not equate to non-existence. Rather, it's empty of existing in the way that it appears, i.e. as being independent, not influenced by anything at all. But it does exist dependently, requiring causes, parts, and imputation by mind. So that final step is the fourth step. The first, how it appears. The second, the investigation. The third, you realize it's empty of existing in the way that it appears. And then fourthly, but it does still exist. It exists dependently. It's empty of being independent, but then fourthly, it exists dependently.
Papa nala gaya mindu sayaji kogoro wada, di ngoye nisirwa nga zo papa tongpa raya sidi, di nala gaya mindu sayaji kogoro wada. Ta tongpa nyi sayadi gaya mindu sayadi kogoro mara. Tongpa nyi labido, lamsang semna gar jengoro sina, sam kogoro sina, kaala yama diwa ranga ngoye ni drupa diyo mara sigoro, tongpa nyi sayadi. Kaala yama diwa ranga ngoye ni drupa diyo mara sayaji, goyo diyo, nzao yine mindu meba re sayaji kugo mar kala ya ma de ba rang ne de ba yo mar la de chowa se chowa tong ba ni re la gro chowa dem ba de tong ba ni re la na chowa dem ba de tong ba ni la na chowa de kala ya ma de ba rang ne de ba ji yo mar re la go re ta chowa de kala ya ma de ba rang ne de ba de yo mar re la de xian ji le de ne de go re sayaji li go ro da.
Generally, in society, we use the term empty. So, for example, this cup is empty of tea. That is correct. That is a factually concordant statement. This cup is empty. It's empty of tea. So that statement is in accordance with reality. But the term emptiness, this we need to get very clear what it means. When we hear the word emptiness, we must understand that it means that that phenomenon, that object, is empty of being independent. It is empty of existing in the way that it appears. And the way that it appears is as if it doesn't require anything else to exist. It's independent. It's not influenced by anything else at all. It appears as if it's unconnected from everything else. It's independent. Something that it appears in a way we could call fixed or static. So this is how phenomena appear to us. But they are empty of existing in that way. But the way they do exist is dependently. They are empty of being independent. But the way they do exist is dependent on causes, parts, and imputation by mind.
Jisan di maa mewa suya la ya, kaan la ya maa do rang wen dhruva di yo maa re san peke samlo di yang chi shimni yang ne yang do jeba shimju che du shen jeba che du kabla da nga zuke di kasan nyema nga zu tikis nyema shuba ne gansa se de da la tene nga zu nga se de ganesh du se pe tene le tene na wa na che rang wen dhruva duye mi do jeba che ya. Ala tene maa kisi nyema shuba ne suglu pa che, tanda chowa dan du she dan, di su chowa di kira, kiyon du kala, chowa di nang du kala, kaan la maa du rang wen du nang du, na wa na xin chi chowa di, ane rang wen du dhruv du dhruv mi du, sa chim chi che du kabla, chowa di kiya la ya, jik kala la maa son na, shimbori chi chowa kiya wala, zeye chi gu du, di che ongpo dan che gu du, di nyi che pala tene, chowa di kiya na, ane tele ya, di chowa di hu se pa, 대월에 파다바 데네기 뛰는 주구도와 선배기 데네기 심주제도 지상 강라에 마디오 바랑원이 주바도 요 말해서 지나다 데네기 삼로디 강라에 마디오 랑원이 주비 동바레샤 선배 삼로디 직 아주 다데 아주 지기 라바 좀도 요 말디마 야네 야도 삼다 야 심주제 제바제 가슴 질려도 신네 왜 지금 내가 때문에 휴지에 비글로 시켜야 돼 동반이 또 별로 시사리 기고로 다디야 깨바즈미 두고마 디야 야네 야도 고미야네 간도 곰데 뉴바야 셔셔다도 되네 도시네 셔셔다 고마이나 하는 저기다 지금 동하여의 그 유자와 녀모 보여서 유자와 다지 말이 바치데 빵 디방소바나 녀모 버릭 차상 깨면 봐 자루 거래 녀모 버릭 차상 깨면은 레앙 바사야 메래 레앙 바사야 메나 디네 디원고 코와레 깨와레 메래 이게면 동하여야 메래 다지도 동하 자와네 메봐 저한테 되는 셔야지 당한 저기 조로시 디니레다
Returning to the text, it is thus forms are like illusions, feelings, discriminations, compositional factors, and consciousnesses are like illusions. To say this in brief, all phenomena are like illusions. No matter what object one investigates, no self-existent object can be found. No matter what the object, no self-existent object can be found. In fact, none has never, ever been found. Nevertheless, we have an incredibly strong habituation to believing that phenomena exist in the way they appear. Every object of thought, we believe that the way it appears is the way that it exists. And this habituation is so strong because everything that appears to mind, every single object of thought appears to exist in the way that it appears, by its own nature. So because our habituation is so strong, to weaken it and eventually eradicate it requires us each to engage in this meditation repeatedly, going over the same objects, such as the self, again and again, and then mixing the meditation with a wide variety of other objects, whether they are forms, whether they are feelings or other mental factors such as discrimination and so forth, always going through the same process. So for example, we're talking about feelings, so the illustration I gave earlier, a feeling arose, recognize how it appears, investigate, see it that it doesn't exist in this way, but it does exist dependently on first the substances being cooked in a particular way, the meal being prepared, then us lifting it to our mouth, probably with the fork, placing it in our mouth, etc., arising to first touching our tongue and maybe smelling it too, then it appears to those consciousnesses and then our mental consciousness. So we have this whole process. And yet, the feeling, this pleasant feeling of a delicious meal, appears as real, as true to us. We analyze and we recognize it's empty of existing in this way. And we do this again and again and again. While we're eating, we can recognize that the self that's eating, the person that's aware of I am eating, investigate that. The self too doesn't exist, etc. So we need to keep investigating with the same objects again and again, as well as a wide variety of objects. Keep coming to the same conclusion. And in this way, we will start to gain a clearer understanding, first, of how the object appears as being truly existent. Secondly, our investigation will become subtler. And then thirdly, our understanding will eventually become deep and transformative. And eventually, we'll even come to realize that the object of investigation is empty of existing in the way that it appears. So here, what I want to emphasize is the need for repetition. Because throughout this text, I've presented the same meditation many times. This is repetition. So you need to engage in the same meditation again and again. Because it's in this way that you'll come to a deeper understanding of this meditation and will weaken and eventually eradicate this deep-rooted habituation to believing that phenomena exist in the way they appear. You'll eventually then be able to eradicate the ignorance of self-grasping and thereby eradicate all the resulting afflictions together with their seeds. In this way, we gain freedom, freedom from suffering, and a state of lasting, stable happiness.
And then Yumada was like, that Yumaya means some days. Yumaya means some day, Yuna Nebaya Main, Chona Nebana Main knows.
Continuing in the text, illusions are also only names. They do not abide in places, they do not abide in directions.
Chisada, and Yuma said, and Yuma Korora Shin to Barevelane, Dia Mares, Yuma di, the Toa di Yuma Tabores, Laviando, Yuma Koron and Yobaruchi, Yuma Koron, that Yuma Tawina, Yuma Koron Shin to Barevelana, the Mares means some res. Yuma said, the Pablo Papa mean Yuma res, Pablo Tapa some Chimado, Koron Wene, Rango Wene, Juptikin Yumaji, Yomare said it.
So here, when one's recognizing that phenomena appear to us, appear in a way that can be likened to an illusion. So we may then wonder to ourselves, well, what about illusions? Do they exist in the way they appear? And they too, whilst appearing to exist by way of their own nature, no such self-existent nature can be found in the illusion. So in fact, an illusion is also like an illusion, meaning it requires labeling by mind, or imputation or designation by mind. So in this way, illusions are also only names, because they are dependent on labeling or imputation or designation.
And Yuma said, you've been a Yuma Kanji, Pat Yuma Tuanji, Nayaki, Daruchi Nawa, and that Yuma said it did not you get Daruch Nayaki, Nangurova did the Sunyendi, Danashin Nayaki, Suchi Nangurova did Yumasirova. Jinganzu Danashin Nangore, Danganzuki now Nashin Tarivas Marwa. Jenigida, the Nigi. Washington now do you suture Danashin not to get suture, di Kumache. Di Koran when the Juba Rebelane, Dirang when the Juba Mares. Tian She Penny Kansaki, the Zeda, Denichilia, Tine, and Tesura Tian Dido is now warriors, and also now warriors. She's a now you're doing a Lupa or di Kuma said, Papa Lupa Tigores, Mado. Lupa Tapa, Dani, Coscientile, the Nigger Nayagi, Manzola, Washila, Tadu, Nayagi, Suchurwa, Sudi Gumasurwa, the Nigud Sudi, Suyan, Ram one Juba Mare, Good Nakin, Scientile, Tune, and Nangore. But Penny Gumategi, Zero down, the Mena Naimevare, Chesapani, Tuesegi, Zero down, and the Nigger Sejo, the Mamudus Joal, Dine, and answer did with Nangores. Just now, and I shinji part Jebachi, Jenna, Kala, Matovachi, Mara, change the tuning word. Just that the nigga do Chimjana, Nayagi, that chick that was Nangorova, Nayag do Chimjeba, Nayag, Daddy, Manzu Mig now lawyer, Penny Zedegalo Yores, Kaho Yores, Chibena, Daddy, Manzu Mig, swinging a Mig now yours and Mig now your Maravada. And the penny man and piggy Zedegalo Yores and dear Merwa, do Simjana and then Yamere, Jeza, called the Niki Chiksha, Delia, Nanche, and Delia, Lupa. Juma said, called Padle Tabasam, Tabasam Yores, but the Simju and Natasha Jibetsana, the Niki now and I see Jigomar Eserta. Sukdirwa, the Naya, Juma said, and Taru, not Zuki Suchi or what. Ding answered Surwa did it, you must say. You may tass at you, you may tass it answer Nadiaki, Such Nangurwa.
here then, when it says illusions are also only names, so if the magician, in the traditional illustration, there's a particular substance, usually a stone, and then the magician casts a spell on the stone and the horse appears. So here we have a horse before us. We investigate, as we did before, and we see we can't find the horse. It may appear to us as being inherently existent, but it's empty of being inherently existent. And it is, in fact, like an illusion. Now, if we recognize that, in fact, that horse is an illusion, a magician cast a spell on a stone, and it is an illusion. Well, what about that horse? That horse that is an illusion. Is this illusion inherently existent? And we investigate, because every object of thought, whatever it is we think about, appears to exist by way of its own nature. It appears to us as being real or true. And we recognize that the illusion itself is also like an illusion, in that it is empty of existing in the way that it appears. It's empty of being truly existent. And this horse, which is an illusion, it itself is classed amongst objects of form. And if we ask ourselves, so this horse that is appearing to us, where is it? Is it there? Does it exist there on the stone upon which the spell has been cast? Or does it exist in our eye? Of course, it doesn't exist anywhere. And no inherently existent horse can be found anywhere. We recognize, though, that both this horse that has appeared as well as the illusion itself require labeling by mind. And to come to recognize this requires the preceding step of investigation. So we investigate this illusion, we investigate the horse, and we recognize they are both illusions. Neither exist in the way they appear.
Yuna nebaya mai, chona nebaya mai no sura. Just now, Gume Nayagi Sukti, Taru Nayagi Naya Sukti Pa, Cheba ina, Kahoyoras and Yu, don't say Yu, and Zedel Yorves and Dela and Mindu. And that don't say Sajagan Chota, and the one she did now, Yorves and Disam, Yamin, Shimshin and Yameres. Just not Penigi Zeji, Joa. Manzu Wongbo Wongxie le Chebi Jinyi, Della Dine Jingnang Gores, Penny Zedang, Manzu Wongbo, Chebi, Dobki, Ditabala Dine, Jiksu Yanji, Jiksha Gores. Jesadi, Nawan Chawadi, Shanchilla, Dune, Nangma, she's a Shanchilla Matiobache, Penny Zeg Udine, Nayag Suki, the Udine, your mother, Sasho Didela, your mother, as a Miginala, your mother's. She's uncoring when you do Bachina. Yana Yuji Dena Yogor, Yana Sajo Dena Yon, Yana was me Dena Yogor, Kalamatu Chairman, Dennis Minduas, Chesa Mevaza, Digi Penny Ted, and as Ombo the tail do Sudi Sharon Gore, Nas Ombo the Matebana, Zedi, Jovine Sudi Shagmare, and as Ombo Yovana, Zepigi, Zedi part Germana, and Sudi Shagmare, Chesa, Zedi part Joata, Wang Ombo Teva, Della Dine. Suchi Shadu, Aneas Lupa Otpini, Sunyan Dase, because a Gume Dase, Lupa, Dagores, Denis Dani Jutu Cheremato, Ming Dasam, she means some was, the Nigi Chan, Dunity, Nang Lupa, Ming Dava some Cheremato, and the Nigi Tawa Main Bada, round when you droop you can you make it God, Step and Yudi and Yamar, Sacho de la Migit and Yamakangi and Yamares.
Illusions are also only names. They do not abide in places. They do not abide in directions. So here we're recognizing that this illusory horse, it doesn't exist at all. The horse we've already recognized that is not a real horse. It's empty of existing in the way that it appears. We've recognized that it's an illusion, but the illusion itself doesn't exist by way of its own nature. It's not dependent, unconnected, not requiring anything else at all to come into existence. It is very clearly dependent. It requires causes such as, again in the traditional illustration, the particular substance, the stone upon which the spell is cast, it requires that casting. It requires a sense consciousness to which it appears and an intervening sense power. So all of these causes are required for the illusion to appear. And moreover, if any of these causes were missing, the illusion would not appear. Recognizing that reinforces our understanding that it is dependent. And moreover, it requires labeling by mind, which is the meaning of saying it is only a name. And so here we recognize that the illusion itself is also like an illusion. But it doesn't mean it's non-existent. It exists dependent on causes and labeling.
And 지상 먼저 메모를 제시한 아주 지동 다요도 지핀이 수행지가 저 샤고 통고로 와당네. 당한도 심주 전에 대 수행지 지핀이 샤르되는 거 삼나라 가르던 것은 그 강나 마디오 그런 분이 유딩으로 지 강나 마디오 그런 거는 유대 바로 있는 것도 와대. 아주 다 넘긴디 아주디 샤고 따고 봐상아지 됐던 나로 지가지 여러 와다. 지대네 지도 핀이 수행디 그런 밖에 이제 유대 봐 샤나 마디오 그런 거는 줍되어 로지가지 있는 거로 와다. 난 거라서 되네 줍되어 나와나 하신지 간스 두세베네 되네기 만족을 거기 구교단에 피디 중인데 구교단 그도마도 셰고도 구교단에 수 다가라 되면 구교단 거면 봐. 제대로 중인디 가요래 생각 심지에 나와나 하신지 가요래라도 셰고도 나노 여러베 세베네 아니 셰고 나도 여바는 아주 그런 나와나 하시랑 뭐는 줍되어 지고 여바네 셰고 나도 여바네 아주 동안디 현다지게 레지 값샤바네 핀이 중인데 요거데 수행의 용문도 와대 셔관나 셔문도 와 동아주 동원지 현다 값샤네 수행의 매와 차르고도 와 나안에 되는 수행디 그런 랑원의 줍디 안주 동들 봐 요르벨람나 동들 여바나 아니 셔고도 매바나 수행의 샤고고로 와 셔문도 와 제사 두스는 안주 샤티가 수행의 그런 나와나 랑원의 줍지 여바나 야나 셔고디 나를 요고래 디니민도 야는 아주 쉬고 딜레시랑기 동기 텔레 요거래 대해민도 지사다 두 심지다 랑원에가 가마도바 랑원에 두바지 매바로지 다나 가르치는 지기 나는 난거래 간에 순고래라도 제가 디 셔고치데 셔고치다 랑기 동하다 니니데 태외다 니니게 태도 갑라 아니 코로지 샤용하지 샤제 아는 안쪽이 될래야 어디 니동어레스 니동 무슨게레스 하지 봐 뢰바다네 대고로와 마도 그런 원이 두바지 마도 바지 연 두바나 심주제나 가야 매되지 예 매도와 되는 가지고 두스네 라바라 가지고 두스네 삼다나 되스 하고 되게 도와디
Another illustration that's often given is that of a reflection in a mirror. When we observe a reflection in a mirror, it's appearing to consciousness, and just like every object, every phenomenon that appears to consciousness, it appears as if it is independent, truly existent from its own side. So that's how it appears. So when you next look in a mirror, recognize that and do this investigation. Ask yourself if it does exist independently, not influenced by anything at all, can it move on its own? And of course, the reflection cannot move left to right unless we move our own head from left to right. And if you ask ourselves, so if it is independent, where does this independent reflection exist? Does it exist in the mirror? If so, I could put a cloth, perhaps a face cloth in front of my face, and the reflection would be unchanged because it exists there. So it cannot exist there. Or, if it existed on my face, then without the mirror, the reflection should still be here. But it wouldn't be. So we recognize that despite appearing as being self-existent, it does not exist in this way. It's empty of existing in the way that appears. Rather, it is dependent on a mirror and a face being in front of it, light being sufficient light as well being present, as well as then, of course, our consciousnesses that will perceive it. Because only then can the object appear of this reflection, appear to our eye sense consciousness, and we can then label it face or my face. So in this way, we can recognize or come to understand that phenomena do not exist in the way they appear. If they did, there would be particular consequences, like the reflection abiding or existing in the mirror or on our face. And it clearly doesn't. So it can only exist dependently, dependent on causes, dependent on labeling.
Denigi Ganglai Matu Rangun to Badi, Mabari, Check and Sinatangazuki, Melona, Sunyan, Jeba Nashin, that did over here. Says now, Koron, when you Juba in and Shimjuchena, Yehu, Yamigan. And the Shimjuchena, when you Juba the Mena, Chiton Nangoran, Ganadus and Jen, Topala, Dinner, and the Sharion to Share. And the Shadow and Dilla didn't Dondadi to go, wasn't Dadu Melon, Dadu, so Dodu and Naboya when Namsa, then the other Nabos and Fatama and Jihadi just called Dondadu to go. Good, then it could do it, dinner, Palu, Taba Shanshila, doing it, Taba, some Yuti, and Della dinner, Dondadi you to two at the Chayas to her.
The illustration of phenomena existing like illusions or reflections are something that you can call to mind at any time, recognizing that phenomena, just like a reflection, it appears, what we're seeing, that reflection we're observing, appears to be real. But of course, it's not. And if you don't think about it, like we don't, then that appears to us as real, but when we investigate, we come to find it cannot be found. If we don't investigate, there it is, there's the reflection. But when we investigate, no reflection existing in the way that it appears can be found. So if we see some, perhaps tomorrow when you look in the mirror and you see some dirt on your face, remind yourself that the only reason that I'm aware that I have dirt on my face is because this has come about in dependence on causes. Not just getting the dirty face, but in dependence on looking at the mirror, that this appearance in the mirror has come about in dependence on causes such as light, my dirty face being here, the mirror being there, and so forth. And remind ourselves of this process of dependency, that nothing exists by way of its own defining characteristic.
Semzembi Kaji, Simjaba Chasanga, Simjaba Kaji, Karsungorasene, Chazan, Duscheding, and the Tadu Kabla Yores, on the Mixumshan Yomares. Tadu Yores, Miktan Tadu Yores, Mikpa Kapshan and Yomares. Chazapinning on the Shingors, Nangores, two studying on the mirror is told to go rather, two standing Tungores. In a social Mik the Kapshas, Dayor Yomerson, Meores.
Amongst the Buddhist philosophical schools, the Chittamatra or mind-only school, it itself has several divisions, and one of their divisions asserts that phenomena exist when they are observed, but they do not exist when they are not observed. So, if you cover your eyes, for example, what you were observing no longer exists for you.
차상 뭐 뒤지게 취해 가리나 도 심주 맞아 봐나 아주 차상기 투모와 통해 줘래서 변이 신도지기나 제가 맞아 봐나 아주 니가게 차상에 통되게 신도지 용거래서 다양 제바이나 두스네 네 통하게 신도디 경화주 통고 말했어. 경화주 통해야지 소소라랑에 통하게 신도를 마도 네 통하게 제바 지도급라 제바제나 네 통하게 신도도 경화 통말 경화 통하게 신도 네 통말을 내고 그래. 그래서 두스도 안에 두스 당고도 샘잠 자산 샘잠비 지다 샘잠 호롱다 지장 샘잠에네 제바 마제바 있나 마다 마제바 있나 아주기 투몽의 토약이 신도다 잘라다 미수보다 지상 요래서 맞아 사상의 통토비하게 제바 안에 소소라랑게 통해야 마도 아니 네 통해야 결혼 통말 결혼서 통해야 네 통고 말해 소소라랑 통해야 투몽 많이 버리리 마도 시 투몽하지요 말해서
Chitamatans, they all assert that impermanent phenomena, we observe them in a common way when we don't investigate. So, for example, if there's an object like a tree here, and we all were looking at this tree, we would all see the same tree. You know, we have this in common, there's a tree. But that's when we don't investigate. When we do investigate, we will come to find that we are each observing a unique tree. Each of us are observing a tree that is different from everyone else. But when we don't investigate, we're seeing the same tree. We're observing a tree in common. But when we investigate, we're observing an uncommon tree, or we find an uncommon tree.
셈기 단위 점을 셈 점바라기도 민후라 셈 점바라도 최근에 셈기 단위 점을 해서 셈기 단위 셈기 5점 셈기 점 그래서네 고 나주 소소나 제바지도 걸어 니 통하게 유 신동디 나랑 게 셈기 땡기 근데 바차 세유 뜻기 신디 주고래서 제가 니 셈기 땡기 바차 세유 뜻 주득이 신디 경화주 통고 말해서 경화주의 셈기 바차 세유 또 비주두게 되 신디 네 통발 지자 소소랑랑의 투모 마인 비기 셈미팅이 바차 세네 능고 레스트 차사 나야 되게 지자 디네자 간에 나 취자 제가 셈미 단인 잠레스 지자 투모 마인 바디 제가 제대도 심주치도 네 나야의 신노데 양아랑의 셈기 바차 세제 능고마도 경호주의 셈기 바차 세 나야 신디 네 통말에 네 셈기 바샤세 신나야디 경험주 통말 제자디 두시네 단양아 투서디 되려 소소 셈이 단위 점래 셈이 뭐 점래 사지 제자 셈이랑게 셈이 딩게 바샤세 또비 두스나요 거래 사지 되네게 셈점 코로나주기 켈렘바 인자 안 두시네 안 제장 마다 마제바나 가서 투모 토야게 강바다 신도다 베셔다야 망고요레스 다신 집에서나 디요 말레스 소소라란 마도 투모아디 요 말레스 그래 The
underlying philosophy behind this assertion is that all phenomena exist only in the nature of mind. Hence the school is called in English mind only, because phenomena exist in the nature of the mind only. So here we can maybe express, because this term only is also the word for mere. So phenomena exist in the mere nature of mind, perhaps it can be said. Here what they mean by this is, when we investigate, the reason we all observe our own, we all have our own unique tree that appears to us, is because the tree appears to consciousness independent on a unique karmic imprint. That unique karmic imprint gives rise to both the tree that appears to oneself as well as the perceiving consciousness. So therefore, because we all have our own set of karmic imprints, we all observe a unique tree. We all have a unique tree appearing to consciousness. But this is the case when we investigate. When we aren't engaging in analytical meditation, we're going about our daily business, then we are observing common objects. But when we investigate, we will recognize that because the observed object, or the object that appears to consciousness as well as the consciousness, arise from the same karmic imprint, therefore we all observe a unique tree in this case.
제가 샘점에 되네 송영도 qabla 다도 섬다도야 저기 텐유비 가르송 최탐제 뢰파 다바자마도 랑응원에 주바도 요 말에 송거로와 코롱원에 주시는 마도 코롱원에 주바죠 요 말에 진짜 섬자비기 최 주나에 되게 차상 뒤지기 최 간에 나이나 소소 나이도 뢰 셈기 바샤디 셈이 다니 셈레 마도 셈라 마도 코롱 파죠 원에 주바죠 요 말에 해야지 셈라 마도 바 코롱 원에 주랑원에 주바죠 요 말에 해야지 진짜디 디나데 텐주비게 손에 가자나네 충충지 파 차쳐봐 이거로와 그래서는 최나디 셈기 때문에 주바마도 셈을 맞대고 코롱 원에 행동의 편이 주요 말이라고 그러던다라 제가 편이 안주 통역의 행동이 나랑의 셈기 땡기 바자 세지는 게 셈을 능고 셰바 능고마도 니 셈기 바자 마세바제 행동의 통역 행동의 배기 원에 주비와 여러분은 요 말이라고 그러와 제가 현 지금 맞대고 랑원에 When Mabare says, Surudi Ligore, Kelly. Semzen Becala was an editing Galasene, Shinojin, Susjeba Chidu Kabla Tashan Jeba, Narang, Shino, Toy, Shinodi, Narang, Semi, Bacha, say you took you to Gore, Mado, Nesemi, Bacha Masevachi, Madubajem, Yudmate Baje, Parin, when Pajana, Nane, Truptivachi, Shindo, the Yomarella Gorva. Cesar, Shalama Duba, Ram, to the Yomare said, pa lamga de ligor da on dugor de
the attendants are arranged in a specific sequence for one to train one's mind in. So one progresses up a ladder of subtlety. So the Prasangika, the Chittamatrans, who are the philosophical school below the Middle Way, the Madhyamaka school, what they're saying is, when one understands it well, is a stepping stone to come to understand the Middle Way view, where they say mind, they're emphasizing the importance of mind when they say that for a impermanent phenomenon to appear to consciousness, it can only appear to consciousness independent on a karmic seed existing on consciousness. And that karmic seed, the ripening of that karmic seed enables the object to both appear to consciousness and consciousness itself that to which it appears. Prasangika say something similar but not the same. But there's a link between the two. Prasangika emphasize the need for consciousness for something to exist, in that something has to be labeled by mind. Any phenomenon to exist requires labeling by mind. So the understanding of the Chittamatran view prepares oneself for the Prasangika view that phenomena must be labeled by mind in order to exist.
저기 멜로나리아 수년 샤디 갑려야 지산 수년 샤디 가서 로리아 간데 차기도 지산의 수년이 빈이 멜로나로 요르베 가서기 동가로 요래 가와디 파 멜로나가 동이 파라들 가와 요래 세지 코스 마티와랑 문에 줍대버 지어베네 간데 요래 세지 가서기 두치네 삼다야기 직 두삼다베네 디토네는 가서기 셈리아 just 직 대바주가 이게 제가 제나도려야 just 패러스 차서와 디네레 안데 단데 디고라지나 단다 디게레 네 디게레.
We'll conclude therefore tonight, and I hope there's plenty for you to think about and to apply. I assume most of you will look in a mirror tonight and probably tomorrow morning. Ask yourself, where is that reflection? Where does it exist? Does it exist here? Does it exist there? Ask yourself, does it exist in the way that it appears or not? And this, and then the other things we spoke about, feelings and so forth, ask yourself, do phenomena exist in the way they appear or not? So thank you, we can conclude there, but if you have some questions, then feel free to ask. Sure.
Sorry, I always make you all late. I just wanted to ask something about the mind-only rules and Sampa. When you say observe, does it mean only objects of eye observe meaning also other sense consciousness, like smell and so forth. And then also, if the when we investigate and we realize that it's appearing according to our unique karmic imprint, shouldn't it also appear unique even when we don't investigate as well? Like, why is there a difference between how it appears when you investigate and not investigate? It should be the same, right, according to that perspective. And then also, you mentioned like this was only for impermanent phenomena. Is it different for permanent phenomena?
So just to say, if anyone needs to go, please feel free to go. But now I'll repeat the three questions. So in relation to the Chittamatra view, the illustration was given about the visual sense consciousness. Does this apply to all sense consciousnesses, that the object and the consciousness arise in dependence on the same karmic imprint?
The first question was, they say objects only appear if we observe, they exist only if we
observe them.
They don't exist if we don't observe them. Does that include only items of sense consciousness or also other sense consciousnesses?
Okay, so I'll just repeat that. So the illustration given was that if we don't see something, it doesn't exist. But is that the case for the other sense consciousnesses as well? So if the object is sound, if we don't hear it, does that not exist for us? Okay. Firstly. Secondly, then they say when we investigate, we will observe the tree in a unique way, because through our own unique karmic imprint. But why is there that need to investigate? Why, when we see a tree in common, is that not said to come from our own unique imprint?
Yeah, shouldn't it also appear unique? Because it should be the same in both cases. Why is it different?
And then thirdly, that those illustrations, it was said there that this is about impermanent phenomena. What is the case for permanent phenomena?
Jiba 자로지 내다 암주 년에 예대 매년에 곧 자디요 말해서 하지.
데네 나서 신동동들 데네 나서 닥쳐 맞잖아. 데네 나서 사마 신동 직바 동기래. 닥쳐 제주 와서 두모마이베 신동 동기래. 가지 나서 두모마이베 사버네 맞으면서 네 카드에 따로 체크래. 나서 따로 맞잖아. 데네 나서 따로 나서 두모마이베 신동 동기래 말해.
다도 맞은 지단데 통도 통고로 와. 투모 따로 맞은 통고로 가르친 다도 지고를 해야 되다. 안주기 지게 곧 네 나와나 하신지 누구의 민도 해야 되다. 안주 두실리고로 와. 판이 신노지 나와나 하시지 누구의 민도 제바쳐야 돼. 제바쳐를 안디지도 안다지 유관했는데 중화래 간스 용고래 세대 그 심주치도 안에 소소기 다 두시나다 니마게 소소기 뒤통하기 바샤 레사 바샤 샤여바는 바샤 신의 통고를 바샤 샤면은 근데 바샤 세요 말이지 통투고 말이지 용고 말해야 돼. 진짜 디 당한지 신노데 배선로치 배로 샤고로 와다. 근데 디 조조디다 당한지 신도의 배자마도다 조등한 주 류리아 아주 동안여야다 디기 동안여야 디게 아니 저 부텔레와 되는 파데 자고로와 자 자고로와 이제 대고시 곧 편이 나잠기 다라 레스네 샤나데 디디 두고를 깨요 말이다 좀 투모도 줍대요 이네 나와 나신지 간스 용고래 두 간스 두의 심주진의 제바치는 마주 셰랍디파 지글로 삽삽 땅고고로와 그 제가 내니기 제바치 지고로 와다. 수유 셈잠바. 다과디 고즈기 디그 시비 바샤 세유 주마루 세지가 라요마네. 주바리에 라고마테 코스카선 다과를 귤레기요 말와. 바샤 세유도 주바 마레라 거다. 디기 시고마데.
So the first one, the first question, so Chittamachans, those who say that if you don't see something, it doesn't exist for you, that applies to all the sense consciousnesses. So if you don't hear or taste or smell or touch something, then for you that doesn't then exist. So that's the first. Then the second, about the unique karmic imprints. So why, if we all looking at something and not investigating, why are we not? Why is it not coming from a unique karmic imprint? Why a common karmic imprint? So Genda then answers by saying, well, that was just an illustration. To understand it better, we should rather think about one's body, upon which we experience suffering. So instead of taking a form of a tree, take the form of one's body. And this is where we experience suffering, and that when we investigate, we will come to recognize that it has clearly come from karmic imprints that we ourselves have accumulated. And then the third, again, we'll talk about impermanent phenomena. What about permanent or unchanging phenomena? So they don't talk about the need of a karmic imprint to ripen for a shared karmic imprint for the object and consciousness, because permanent phenomena do not come about independent on causes. So they have a separate presentation for permanent phenomena. But your second question about unique and common karmic imprints, I'll say more on this tomorrow. Okay. Then, thank you very much.